Please, the court. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Margaret, Tom, Michael, gentlemen. This is a great day. In a lot of different ways. Some days are difficult. Some days we hear bad news or we go through a difficult time, but every day, depending on how you look at it, with a few exceptions, can be a celebration. And I don't mean that lightly. There are things about our lives today and the place where we live that are like no other place and no other time in history. So if I, at times, even in questioning, become melodramatic, or I discuss or question jurors about things that might be important to me or to you, and as I go through the things I anticipate that this trial will bring to you and to us, I say it's a great day for each of you because you have an opportunity to experience what we do here. The courtroom's filled with all sorts of different people. The eyes of the world are upon us in our fine little city, where we live and we make it our home. We're not perfect. We can always do better. And sometimes what we do in my own life is review things I've done, see if I can be better. So I'm not perfect, and sometimes I forget the rules. That's okay, because there'll be objections during the course of the trial. The judge will make decisions on some of those rules, and we might fight over some of those rules, but that's just little stuff. We'll get all past that. We'll all get past that. But today we begin we'll bury Ronald Rudin in this trial. We'll put to rest a lot of questions. And we'll come to understand the truth. It is so very important that each of you listen to the testimony and watch carefully everything that's said here. Watch people that testify. As in voir dire, you're asked to look at them. There's a lot here at stake. Margaret's life is at stake. Ron Rudin's life was stolen from him. There was probably an expectation. Lots of people wonder what might be said in an opening statement. Oftentimes a defense tactic would be to vilify the deceased. Sometimes people are just what they are. But what I have come to see and what I can look at as a result of the evidence was that Ronald Rudin was no weak-kneed sister. Ronald Rudin was a tough guy. I mean, in every sense of the word. He wore clothes that kind of accentuated his persona, what he was and who he was. He wore black. black handmade boots, black pants, black shirt, black coat. He didn't take anything from anybody, under any circumstances. He wasn't afraid of anybody. He wasn't afraid of anything. But on the other side of that, he seemed to do things that were different than what we might see. He did things that would indicate a level of paranoia or fear that doesn't seem to be consistent with the things I just said. But they both are true. He always wore 2 firearms on him everywhere he went. A Colt 45 Combat Commander in his shoulder holster, and one in his boot. Now, we live in Nevada, and those of you who weren't raised here, that in and of itself doesn't mean anything other than he liked his guns. There's a lot of people like that. I was lucky in this case to have an opportunity to involve a level of ballistics and things about Class 3 firearms. I collect them, so I understand about a lot of these things. And I was able to look at the evidence, and I'm not going to give you my opinion. It helps me when I look at things, when I look at police reports, when I look at witness statements, to try to figure some things out. So I know what questions to ask. So sometimes it isn't just what's said in opening statements. Sometimes it's not just what's said by a witness. Sometimes it's not just what's said by a police officer. And it's not always what they do that reveals the truth. It's sometimes what they don't do. It's important. It's sometimes what they don't say when they should. Sometimes it's what they hope will lie hidden that tells us far more about the truth, about events and circumstances than anything we might otherwise have in our discovery and police reports and all the different things that we, as lawyers, use to prepare ourselves. So Ron Rudin also carried a shotgun, loaded shotgun, round pump shotgun, on his lap or in the car, in every car he drove, wherever he went. Had guns all around the house. Why? When he seemed to be so in control. But perhaps, and I'll leave it at this, perhaps what it was is he was afraid to die. He wasn't afraid to live, but he was afraid to die by someone else's hands. There seemed to be other evidence of that. You see, when we review evidence, like you'll have to do, as you promised to do, as you promised me and you promised counsel and the court to make a just decision, in order to make a just decision, sometimes you can't just look at what's seen. You have to ask why. You should ask those questions in your mind. In fact, sometimes it's better for you to be able to do that, because whoever's speaking that you question doesn't know you're asking that question. And what they do, or what they say, or what they try to hide, might answer that question for you. Or it might leave some doubt in your mind as to what the truth really is. This is a great day for me. This is a culmination of a career. The people in this case, we're not strangers. We know each other. Chris and I were sworn in as deputy DAs the same day. And I congratulate you, Chris, on a presentation that was organized, well thought out, best money can buy. It really was good. Perhaps I'm a little different sometimes than other people might be. I look for passion in people. I look for not merely those who wish to exist, but people who want to celebrate life. And you, each and every one of you, I think you all understand what I mean. And so I ask you, as I go through the rest of the things that I will bring to our table, to question everything I say. Don't believe a word. Question everything. If you assume anything without knowing it for yourself, then what you are doing is relying upon someone else's review of the evidence or take on it. So, but when I tell you that, does that mean I'm going to lie? No. It just means you can't take things at face value. You just can't. Good reasons. You may find that some of these reasons are compelling. The kind of things that you would like to ask questions about. Some things that don't make sense. 2 plus 2 equals 5. You'll hear the names of witnesses and people involved in this case. Our friends, our peers. It is the collective experience of witnesses and detectives and private investigators that assist us in presenting to you evidence or articles of evidence which you then have to rely upon in making your decision concerning, well, the reason why we're here. You see, we are all here because Margaret Rudin is accused of a crime. And in this country, it is so important to us, our freedom, that we will not stand for people who get in the way of a fair trial. We don't let other people out there who, for some reason or another might have an interest in the decision. No. We find strangers. We call them peers, but you're strangers to the case. We question and with you to make sure that you can be fair and objective. Because when we want to be judged, we don't want to be judged by prosecutors or defense lawyers. We want to be judged by people who can't be reached, who can be anonymous. You can listen and hear and exercise the fairness that we've lived for and that so many of our people and friends and family in the past died for. Margaret Rudin, she's been married 5 times, so she has previous names. So when you had the indictment read to you, you heard Margaret Rudin because she was married to Ronald Rudin, her husband. You heard some things about the relationship, which, if taken out of context, might give you a certain idea about the relationship, and that idea, what you believe, what they were like, may make a difference in how you vote. So it's important to look at things in the totality of their circumstances and not to take them out of context. So why is this a perfect example? If you want to know an opinion about me, I guarantee you'll find them. Different from different people. Not many people know me. I have few close friends. Like Margaret Rudin, had few close friends. He had many employees, many people that claimed to love him and to know him. Not many he trusted. You see the directive that they mentioned, if you recall in the statement? That's an example of something I'm going to discuss with you in my opening statement. That's important to distinguish between another type of evidence. See, the directive is a piece of paper that was signed by Ronald Rudin in 1991. It says certain things on it, and his signature and the date is there. It can be taken for exactly what it is, as the truth. And there's some words in it that are important to remember. Because, you see, you get a piece of paper like that you can rely upon, and then people want to talk about it. They want to say, well, what else may have been said? What he really meant was this. Another example of something to look at as I go through my opening statement. Throughout the trial, each of you have been given notes. You've been given notepads. You'll be asked by the court to probably keep your notes, not show them to other people. You see, these things would be your private thoughts. Your private thoughts that no one else should really look at. They're the things that you want to write down and remember because they may be important, or they may be important to you. See, what's important to each of you as you sit right now is based upon your whole life, your family, your friends, things that have happened to you, your hopes and your dreams. And they not just maybe, I probably could be safe in saying that what's important to one of you is different than what's important to the remaining 11 of you. But it is that collective wisdom that I have to rely upon to guarantee that my client, Margaret Rudin, gets a fair trial. You know, I'm sorry, I've never liked the way that sounds, and I'll back up from that and explain why. I mean, it almost sounds like even movies we see. I think it's like Judge Roy Bean. Let's give him a fair trial and then string him up. See, there's also a difference of opinion as to what a trial is or should be. And people may differ. Some might say it's a quest for the truth. Others might say it's nothing more than a competition for credibility. One's, I think, an ideal. The other may very well be just a reality. But we'll see. You see, when you judge someone You can't judge them on what they do today. We have good days, we have bad days, things that that affect each of us in our everyday lives. I could be a wonderful, caring father, coaching soccer and basketball and helping kids with homework and doing all those things I did with my kids as they were growing up. I was young, the first time I got married. But then another day, I might scream at someone, yell at them for, I don't know, for asking me some question because I was too busy and I was thinking of something else. If someone saw that, you might have an opinion of me. And that opinion would be based upon how you saw me that day. Like each of us, Margaret Rudin and Margaret were just normal, everyday people in many ways. Married 5 times each. Well, if you've been married that many times, at the very least, it probably tells you that you're both headstrong, strong people. And to describe a marriage based upon one day or a couple of days, or to describe a marriage based upon or make a decision or a judgment on what that marriage was like based upon one type of person, when you do that, don't you have to listen to see who it is that's talking? Oh, here's a good example. If we really want to know about the way a man feels about his wife, do we ask his mistress? Is that where you're going to find the truth? Or is maybe she fooling herself? Like she's the only one that understands. If you want to know, and you'll hear testimony like that, if I don't make myself perfectly clear. Tom Tarr is my co-counsel in this. And I'm real grateful to have him here. Sometimes in my zeal, I need to be grounded a bit from someone as good as Tom, as good a friend as he is. Investigators like Mike Wysocki and Tom Dillard. You see, the 2 homicide detectives in this case are Detective Jimmy Vaccaro. Those of us that have known him, although I'll refer to him as Detective Vaccaro on the witness stand, that's how we treat each other with respect. I've known Jimmy since 1980 when I got here. When I was a green 25-year-old kid who came here to crush crime and make the world safe for democracy. You better believe that's what I thought. Tom Dillard was a retired homicide detective, one of the best there was. Mike worked in the 70s, undercover, Metro Narcotics. Karen Ramos at various times have worked street, Metro Narcotics, undercover a long time, and homicide. You see, this experience that I'm taking some time, and I'm almost done with this part, to explain to you is to give you perspective. Because context, perspective, these are the things behind the words that people say. And when you need to be able to judge the facts, as is your role in this case, these are the tools that you use, like you would in your everyday form of life. These are the things that you make decisions about, because in our everyday lives, extremely important things we investigate, don't we? That's why these things are so important to you as well. See, perspective and context help us to understand people's motives. Now, motive is a term of art, like you saw up here. Remember it said motive. There's something special about certain words, because if you study our language, there's words that have power to them. They make you think things. Motive is one of those. Sometimes there are cases with no motive. Sometimes any number of people have a motive. Several people share the same motive. It's kind of a general idea that just means nothing more than someone may have a reason to do something, or they might have a benefit to gain. That's all. It's not an element of the offense. It has to be proven. It's what the prosecution so often takes great time to explain, when otherwise it doesn't seem really explainable, or the circumstances don't make sense. The ability to recognize the truth when you see it is so very important then to you. Some rules that are helpful. Just a couple of them. To be honest with you, this portion probably was about 8 pages the first time I wrote it, and was thoroughly confusing to anybody except me. See, one of the difficulties I have sometimes is not in analyzing facts, not in looking at something and knowing what it means. I mean, using my own meager efforts to figure something out. The difficulty I have at times is communicating it to people. So I have to look at it and talk to other people, and they'll bring me back down to earth and say, Mike, what are you trying to say? What are you trying to get across? So it became more simple. You can trust action for a thing that exists to be exactly what it is and nothing more. Now, in terms of this case and logical consequences, it's important because you will have so many things thrown at you during this trial that it's sometimes difficult to categorize things, and things that need investigation. A witness statement. A paramour of Ron Rudin, Sue Lyles, one of the witnesses. So she's an extremely, very important witness to them. And she is one of the people that will testify about a letter that's not signed, and there's some word or name in there that only Margaret would have known about, and some other things. But you see, they need to get to a certain point to prove their theory of the case. And Sue Lyles is one of their witnesses. So I'm not telling you to disbelieve her or to believe her. I ask you to question who she is and what her motivations would be, because you decide whether or not she's really as important as we think. reviewed again this morning my opening statement and threw most of it away. I don't know. Maybe it's just something I do. One day, I may seem to be aggressive and argumentative, wanting to fight over every issue, banty words with counsel. You may remember. And then other times you kind of stand back and you look to see what's important for each of you to see.
Mr. Amador, I think I'm ornery all the time. This is really an opening statement, right? And I think that I don't know if the DAs want to object or not. They've been very polite, I think. I allowed Mr. Owens to, get away with the Margaret play and the Shakespeare quote. That's fine, but we've been here for 35 minutes. You can maybe save that for closing, but an opening statement is just like a roadmap that tends to show what the evidence will show. And you're really, for 35 minutes now, I didn't mind 5, 10, 15 minutes, but I would wish, in all respects, that you would just get to what the evidence, in your opinion, will tend to show, and we'll move on. All right? I hate to interrupt you, but I'm obligated as a judge to do that. So, but proceed, please.
No, Judge, and I appreciate that you do. I was at the end of, I guess, that page and that portion. I needed some help in this case. I needed a witness who could, who's an eyewitness, because there doesn't appear to be any. You may have heard questions about direct and circumstantial evidence. You'll receive, during the course of the trial, direct and circumstantial evidence. Now, you'll receive an instruction that the law does not play favorites between the two. But it's also important to understand, as you go over this evidence, that they're proved, and they get to that point of no favor only by certain levels of proof. You might have a witness who says they see something. You might have a circumstance that in and of itself just exists, but requires witnesses to describe it or expert witnesses to explain it. One of the beauties of that, and the state usually will tell you they like circumstantial cases because so much of it is based upon logic and science. Things that we can know with the help of experts, and things which, if they are true to their procedures, can give us a reliance that will help you make a decision. Part of that there will be evidence that the remains of Ronald Rudin were found at Nelson's Landing on January 21st, 1995. When you look at something, and I understand that some things are difficult to look at, this case is not as bad compared to others, but some bones and his skull were located by some people in that area. It's actually a well-traveled area. You'll learn a lot more about it during this trial. But what do I expect the evidence to show? Where's that witness? He can't speak to us because he's dead. But he left some things behind that tell a story about what happened to him. There are things that the beauty of physics and scientific method are that some things you can look at, know to be true, and you can compare those things to statements that other people might make that are inconsistent with them, and then you can know which to trust. We have done this part before. We're just going to... This isn't mine. So you have to excuse me while we... Again, I guess the modern times create great special effects. Me, I use a yellow pad and a pen, and I use photographs. Quits and goes. It's through our screen. Yeah, that's some little pattern. But it's not, so we're looking at it, but it's the jury. Judge, maybe I take a moment. They, I think, got together and said, right, to work this out.
Is it on now?
Yeah.
All right, proceed, Mr. Amador.
See, some problems are pretty simple to solve, aren't they? On button. The photograph of the skull found at Nelson's Landing, January 22nd, 95. It says John Doe. John Doe because when you find remains in the desert, like so often we hear about, I mean a lot. I mean there are how many skulls and how many remains over the years have been located but never identified. But this is what they found, and it is an article of evidence as well as the deceased. He was a man, and what was left relates some things that happened to him. There are things that are important about what they found and where they found it and how these things were located that you can then take your own common sense and logic to understand in light of other evidence. This is Carr. It was found like this, behind the Crazy Horse 2. I think it's on Industrial or Western. It doesn't matter. That's where it was found. That's the way it looked when it was found the evening of Thursday, December 22nd, 1994. That was Ron's car. When they found it, they impounded it and did all sorts of different testing. It didn't show a lot. Not every piece of evidence results in something that we know, but there is a story behind this. How did it get there? Who was in it? The evidence will show that there were 4 people in it. There's mud inside of it that was tracked in by 4 people, which appear to be men's boots. Certainly, there aren't any heel marks. And the mud inside doesn't match the mud that they know to be out at Nelson's Landing. So where was it? I don't know. And neither do they. Unless, during trial, I hear something more. When we do, well, we'll ask some questions, won't we? Someone who has passed on, who can't speak, can't lie. He may have, Ronald Rudin may have lied to his friends about some of the things that he was involved in. he may have been dishonest with his wife and his mistress. Oh, there was something in there about motive, because something about Margaret might kill her husband if she ever found out that he had a mistress. She'd been married 5 times. Hadn't been one that she'd met that hadn't cheated on her and that she knew about. And she wasn't, Sue Lyles wasn't the first. At least 5 we've identified. We'll see how many we can get to court. But there was also a motive about money, that she may have killed her husband for the money she would get. She would have been better off in a divorce. I learned something when I was young. When you investigate things, follow the money. See where it leads you. And ask questions. You see, Ron Rudin was different to his business partners, like Harold Boscuti and Sharon Cooper, than he was to his best friends. His best friends see, when you've been around for a long time, you know a lot of people like him. His best friends were homicide detectives in Metro Intelligence back in the 70s. Good old boy Dave Hatch. He's retired, he's a good detective, worked for Metro Homicide, was the lead investigator when Ron Rudin's 3rd wife died in his bedroom by suicide. You see, it's helpful that we understand something happened in that room before, because it helps explain certain actions. It helps explain some physical evidence that the state would like you to believe is one thing, when it's not. The way that you're going to be able to know is not by believing us, but by asking questions and listening to the experts. I'm sorry I didn't have a kind of picture that they had. That's the only one I had real close by. That was his driver's license in 1989. Next picture. Ron wore black, 2 guns, and wore a bracelet. White gold, diamonds encrusted. Said Ron. Doesn't look burnt though. But that's for you to take a look at. You see, where this was found was not right next to where they call the burn site. It was, I don't know, 10, 15 feet away. They might opine that somebody dropped it accidentally. I guess they could opine that if they chose to. I can think of better reasons why it was left there. But see, this is something that just is. And we don't always have to listen to what people say is their reasons, especially if they're motivated by something. Why would that bracelet be left separate from the rest of the remains? You see, the rest of the remains only weighed about 500 or so grams. The charred, little tiny bones in the campfire. And then his skull was found separate from that, another 15 or so feet away. Not next to where all that important evidence with the antique trunk and all that they were talking about. Did it grow legs? I don't think so. And when you look at it, does that skull look burnt? Or does it just have a scorch mark on it? As if it may have been placed next to whatever was near the fire. What's important about that? You see, physical evidence, and this is what I wanted to talk about in the opening statement, physical evidence that will be presented to you like this can be followed up on and questioned, and you can learn about what really happened if you understand the significance of certain things to certain people. So, in judging the evidence, those are the things you'll look at. The relationship of people to each other. Ronald Rudin. I mentioned only the fact that Mr. Rudin was extremely well known at Metro because it's a fact. He had many, many friends for many, many years. They cared about him. And looking at the way things were handled in this case, on the one hand, you could look at the actions. I mean, how certain things that happen so fast. You go, that doesn't happen that fast. But then you can understand. And there's nothing wrong with this. And as I talk about people and witnesses, I don't want you to think I'm making a judgment or I'm saying something bad about them. Some things just are. And they have to be reported to you. To protect their own, great lengths will be done by officers. I would. To protect my family, I'd go to great lengths. Officers, if one of them is down, they're all on alert. And Ronald Rudin was such a close friend to many of them that in learning that it helped me to understand why they were so zealous and did the things that they did. Unfortunately, sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, when you're not objective and when you're too close, because Ronald Rudin had friends in Metro Narcotics. Back in the old days, I used to write search warrants. Not all of them, a lot of them. You miss things. You snap to a judgment. You make a decision immediately because you want an answer. You got to have one. And when you do that, unfortunately, you put on blinders, and there's just so much that you miss. And that's why you, as the jury in this case, you'll have to ask those questions. You see, when Peggy Rudin committed suicide in that room, Dave Hatch, Lieutenant John, it's pronounced Charlie Boy, I guess, but in Nevada, it's Charlie Boy, among others. You see, Dave at Metro Homicide, I'm not sure which of any of these people will be testifying, but I anticipate that at least one of them will be testifying to what they observed in 1978. Now, why is that important so long ago? Why? You remember that counsel mentioned luminol testing. Luminol is a tool for investigation that in and of itself can't crack a crime. It gives you a way of moving forward. It's nothing more that identifies one possible source, one of them being, it's interesting, it doesn't identify blood. Blood reacts. It decomposes. It changes over time. So you can wipe something up if I had a bloody nose, or I had a cold, and I could sneeze, and I could wipe it up. But you can come back, and on some surfaces, especially a slump stone wall that absorbs, I've cleaned up the blood, but what's left is something that luminol reacts to, a metal or an enzyme, something that actually is easier to see over time. And then it lights up. You use a special light, apply it to the wall, and it will light up. One of the things that will show is where there might have been blood at one time, but there are other things that react with it as well. But you see, back then, Peggy used a .357 Magnum, 5.5-inch barrel revolver, and put it right here. Okay? We don't have to go into the photographs of that. Well, they're gone. They're just gone, I guess. And the entire top of her head from here back, all of it was blown, completely blown off. And Don, Charlie Boy, was one of Ron's oldest and best friends, and he loved him. And he had, well, Don himself has a great history. He had been head of Metro Intelligence at one time, moved over to, under Ralph Lamb, and moved over to uniform, was lieutenant with Uniform Patrol, UFSD. At the time, he got a personal call from his friend Ron, asked him to come out to the scene. There were other homicide detectives. They did their investigation. But what's important is I expect the evidence to show that what you are seeing on the wall, behind the bed, where the bed was in the exact same position as it was back in 1978, and above the bed, I'm sure it wasn't a photograph of Margaret back in 1978, but when you look at a room, there's just some things you would put there. There's a bed. And this room is a very unusual room. Low ceiling, narrow. There's only one place to put the bed, and they were in the same place. And there would have been a photograph in the same position as Margaret's. You see, what's helpful is it tells the whole story, doesn't it? Like we were talking about. You see, if you just see that luminol lights up, by the way, there's this special way that they're able to preserve luminol, because without it, you can't really tell what you see. It lights up in different places, but you can't measure. You have to take a photograph this special way. It has to do with time delays on lighting, and I won't get into the specifics, but when you've gone to school to learn about blood spatter, and you know about forensic serology, ballistics, and all those things that you have to learn about. There's a lot of these things that you can look at, and it helps you to understand. And here, it's helpful to understand what might seem hard to understand without it. And that's that experts will tell you that luminol gets better over age. So the fact that it was years before, and it can even be painted over, doesn't matter. That's why it's such a great investigative tool, because you can wipe it off, you can paint over it, and it still comes through. Unfortunately, the photographs stink. I'm sorry. They're so bad. And I don't know how it happened in this case, and not others, but you normally can see, extremely clearly. I don't know, maybe it was a new cameraman, maybe there was a problem with the equipment, but you can't see with anything. There isn't a good record of it. So what you'll have to do is go on the testimony of what we do know. And the only way to describe what I expect the evidence to show, the luminol portion of the state's forensic case, is what Detective Hatch, John Charlie Boy, and the others saw back in 1978. You see, that's one portion of it. When you're in a room that's an old house, a lot of events have occurred there. And there, at first glance, it may look like something. You can add a whole bunch of things together that happened over a period of a long time, and then when you walk in and you have investigative tools, it looks like something. It looks like a picture painted like the prosecution would like to paint it. But they didn't ask the right questions. You won't find anywhere in the police reports, Detective Vaccaro or the homicide detectives, anything about Peggy Rudin. When they're trying to get probable cause for a search warrant, it's not in there. Did they not know it existed? Well, Dave Hatch wasn't retired. He did what they call he rode the wire in this case. You know, they got wiretaps on Margaret, all sorts of different telephones, and they listened to her. I couldn't tell you how many hundreds of hours or thousands of hours. Kind of interesting, though, that in all that time, didn't get anything. But Dave Hatch was riding the wire, and so he would have, at least he had the opportunity to tell these detectives, you know, that's not the only thing that happened in that room. I was there. I'll never forget it. Poor Ron, he's heartsick. You know, it's important, isn't it? Another example, like I talked to you about earlier, of something that you need to ask more questions and learn history. The names of their state majority witness, the most important ones. You'll hear these names: Harold Boscuti, Sue Lyles, Sharon Melton. Ronald Danner passed away. So did Eugene DeFlorentiis and Sharon Cooper. As you look at statements of people standing alone, a statement alone, if you write something down, a statement alone compared to another one, logically, there's no difference between the truth and the lie in and of itself. You have to look at their relationship, and you have to look at other factors that you can compare it to, and whether the same people have similar motives that are saying these things. Augustine Lovato and Marina Flores. It's interesting, two other witnesses. Marina was their housekeeper that came in once a week to clean. She'll have testimony. You'll hear testimony from her that there probably weren't any handkerchiefs in that bathroom by the 27th, because she cleaned it every week since his disappearance to the time of the search warrants. And she remembered washing them and his socks after he disappeared, putting them away. Maybe she missed it. The state's theory is that Margaret Rudin killed her husband in that room. You see, if you look at their evidence, their entire case rests upon certain things. If they don't provide you with evidence as to these specific certain things, they have no case, because it's a circumstantial case. The circumstances must all fit, one after the other, collectively, and if one piece of it is pulled out, the whole thing falls. So their house, their case is built on a foundation that has to all fit together, because if you pull part of it out, it doesn't work. Normally, a defense would involve picking out little problems with the investigation, inconsistent statements between witnesses, a word here, a word there, and anything we can find so that maybe we have a chance at arguing a reasonable doubt at the end of the case. That ain't this case. Ronald Rudin, they say, was shot to death in his bedroom the evening of December 18th, 1994. If not, he's not in that room, if not that date, nothing else they have fits. She could not physically accomplish what they say she did. So, how can you prove this big conspiracy?
If I may, the court corrected to mind, the state has been reluctant to make objections, but I would consider all of this argument, certainly at this point.
That was argument. I'll withdraw that objection.
Thank you, Mr. Amador. And thanks for objecting, Mr. Owen.
They claim that Margaret killed him for money. You'll see if that's true or not. You look at the house that he lived in, out on Alpine, across from the old Red Rock theaters, and there's a strip mall that also is owned by Ron Rudin. You're going to take a look at maybe photographs of the house. This is the person across the country they've described as a real estate tycoon. you know why he lived there? Couldn't afford to live anywhere else. And that's the truth. You'll find that out when you look at this case. And why the timeline that they were talking about is really important. And there's some gaps, some things that need to be filled in. Their case is based upon an assumption that Margaret killed her husband for jealousy, but also that she was cold and calculating, calm. But they seem to be inconsistent, but that's all right. You just judge the evidence for yourself. That he was killed with a certain firearm, a .22 caliber Ruger, fully suppressed, semi-automatic firearm. But they have the gun. To prove that somehow Margaret may have had that gun, they don't bring in ATF records. Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. It's a Class 3 firearm, by the way, which requires that in order to own a suppressor, you have to pay a federal tax stamp. In Nevada, it's legal. You can do that. No, they have a letter that was supposedly written by him, which includes a comment that it may have fallen into something that she was taking when they were possibly going to get a divorce early in their marriage. And that she somehow kept it hidden for all those years until the day when she might suddenly lose her temper in a jealous fit of rage and pull it out. Is that what they're saying? They say that he slept in that bed a certain way. And that's the reason why they can know certain things about him. Listen to the way the witnesses testify about that. What kind of testimony do they have? What kind of things do they have that to convince you about something that's important about what happened in that room? They say that Margaret covered up the crime, cleaned up the evidence, somehow, if he was shot while laying asleep in his bed, he would have to be dragged out of the bedroom into the bathroom where something may have been done, or then out of the house. See, that's where luminol can really come in handy. See, when you're doing an investigation into a homicide, they luminol the whole place. And
I would object to I think it's already minute, and I think counsel's testifying.
Yeah, we're just concerned about what happened in this case, this thing.
question everything. That's why things weren't done this time. His body was apparently taken to Nelson's Landing, where they say his body was burned. That's the burn site right there. That's what they call that. This is a little bit closer. These are, that's a little bit better picture of it again. What are we looking at? It's important that you look at this. It's a big part of the state's case, because you're going to hear testimony from witnesses. And, you know, this is interesting. I haven't talked about this before, and I'm going to kind of move forward pretty quickly from this point forward, okay? I anticipate that the evidence will show in this case that Ronald Rudin was not shot in his bedroom, that no murder took place in that bedroom, and that there is absolutely no physical evidence of any kind that you can rely upon to believe that. Because our experts, I expect will show that the little pieces of blood that they call high-velocity spray are completely inconsistent with what high-velocity spray really is. And you see, they will testify that blood splatter is science. It means something. You see, it's the result of pressure. When you have a closed system, like a man's head, and he's shot, it creates pressure in, which causes blood to come out. When you have something as small as a .22, it doesn't go very far. It doesn't do very much. It can't. Why? It's how things were created. There are rules in this universe, in physics, weight, forces, that we can explain if you have the right expert. His body wasn't burned here. You never heard me say that before. There's some things you're going to be able to look at in this case. You can't burn a body with gasoline and things. Gasoline flash burns. Asking the right questions, you'll hear experts given this information who will be able to attest that, like Dr. Noguchi, I anticipate will testify. He's the coroner from Los Angeles. He, I guess, wrote a book about some of the things that he did there. See, he'll be able to testify that conflagrations, huge places, can burn up. Incredible fire, but yet bodies are carried out, and certainly they're dead, but they don't look like this. That's what they look like when they're burned in a crematorium. They come out charred. In fact, when they're charred, their internal organs are actually still intact. Something was burned there, maybe in the trunk, but it's not. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll back off. I almost was arguing again. It's incredible the types of evidence that you're going to find in this case. There will be a dichotomy of witnesses that is rarely ever seen. All I can hope that you do is notice the difference in terms of what they were looking at and what the motives of these experts were. Or maybe what was left out. Or sometimes it is the method of investigation. It is the reporting of facts. It is the accumulation of facts that the experts have to use. And if not done correctly, then you can't trust the results. The state's burden will be to prove beyond a reasonable doubt each of the elements of the offense. So look at their theory and find out if their theory holds water. Look at their proof and see if it's the kind of proof that you can rely upon. Ask, what are they trying to communicate to you? Why? What building materials did they use to build this house? Was it on solid foundation, on facts that you know to be true? Or does it start with information from sources that can't in and of themselves be relied upon? If it is unreliable, it's like a house of cards and will fall. If its foundation is strong, built on the truth, then it'll stand unshaken and it'll be safe. Different kinds of timelines can be explained. I mean, what do we talk about? We can start creation to present. I think that's probably a little bit too broad, and I won't need to do that to explain physics, why the universe is as it is, why even the kinds of testing that they can do now can actually judge the age of the universe. It's for another time. Next. His birth until present? Still, his experiences are helpful, but we don't need to know how he grew up, all of those, every little detail. It would take too long. It's not necessary. There's something else, and there are three parts. There's what happened before December 18th that are related to the witnesses in this case and the activities of Ronald Rudin as it relates to those witnesses and his business or businesses. And what happened after December 18th see what happened to what he owned, what he spent his life building, and who took it. Next. You know, and I apologize, I don't know how to use all this new equipment. Like I said, I'm fairly simple, but I want to go through what happened. What do we know? December 18th, 1994. Ronald Rudin doesn't come home. What else? Margaret Rudin. Margaret opened her new antique shop that day. She had the grand opening, a day to celebrate. Her husband, who owned that strip mall, allowed her to use one of those stores as her new antique shop. Margaret had competition. Sharon Melton had been with Ronald Rudin for a long time. She'd worked hard for him. She'd bent over backwards for him. She'd done his books. She helped a lot with his books, what went to the accountants. She probably felt a little upset about Margaret getting that, since she also owned an antique shop. And it seems that she's been very helpful, even in the last couple of months, helping Detective Vaccaro find witnesses who might say that they sold a trunk to Margaret. Her statements are extremely important in this case, and I'll be real concise here. December 19th, 1994, Monday. There's two ways to look at this day. One, based upon actions that are provable, and words or statements. Now we also know that Ronald Rudin, according to his calendar, he was supposed to be in his office by 11 o'clock in the morning because he had an appointment, an important appointment. See, what I anticipate the evidence will show is that Ronald Rudin struggled financially all the time. He was always thinking big and always in debt, borrowing money, making big deals, making money, transferring money. And in one particular way, he was truly brilliant. That's the next part when I get to that. But this week is important. He also had an appointment to be up at Lee Canyon early in that morning. But what's important about that is it was in his calendar, maybe 45 minutes, an hour to get up there, an hour to get back. Could he have been back at his office at 9 o'clock in the morning to open up the shop for Mr. Danner and Sharon Melton, who claimed that he wasn't there at 9 and there was something wrong? It's in a couple of different reports that Margaret Rudin, that she waited a suspiciously long time to report her husband missing. See, these are words. When you write a certain way, you know, you can make an innocuous statement look suspicious just by putting words into it. So look at the words used in a pen register affidavit or a search warrant. Compare it to other things. Margaret called the police on Monday, non-emergency number, and asked them about reporting her husband missing. And they said, you cannot report him missing for 48 hours. It is what it is. And no matter what they say about suspicious or long, they can't avoid that fact. Now, was it just Margaret, who maybe much later would say something like that? No. In fact, it's in Danner's written statement on Tuesday that Margaret had...
Objection, Judge. That's absolutely not accurate. And more importantly, Danner's dead.
Well, yeah, again, that statement's not going to be admitted in evidence?
Well, Judge, that'll be a decision for this court to make.
Well, let's skip it then. If I didn't make a decision, I don't know. I can't judge that because I don't. If you think that's what the evidence is going to show, then tell it to the jury. If you don't think it, you better not tell it to the jury. But that's up to you. So go ahead.
Can we approach on that?
Yes. Trial, read, watch, or listen to any report or commentary on the trial. Any person connected with the trial by any medium of information, including newspapers, television, radio, and don't form or express any opinion on a trial until the cause is finally submitted to you. We'll have a break now. We'll be at ease until adjournment. Remind me never to ask you guys to estimate time. Mr. Owens, you went about over 2 hours. You said you're going to be about an hour, hour and a half. You already been talking an hour and a half, but that's all right. But well, what's this problem now here?
Here's my objection, and that is this. First of all, he has now rang the bell in front of this jury indicating that Ron Danner said A, B, C, and D.
Ron Danner is who?
Ron Danner was a helper or an employee, longtime friend of Ronald Rudin.
Oh.
Ron Danner is deceased. He has been deceased for quite some time. There has been no motion whatsoever wherein the defense is asked to produce hearsay conversations or hearsay statements from Ron Danner. Ron Danner's dead. They never brought that motion. In good faith, I've relied on the fact that dead people aren't going to speak in this case unless or until this court says so. And we filed a motion wherein we asked for some of Ron Rudin's statements to be made admissible with hearsay exceptions. There's been no hearsay exception motion whatsoever as it relates to Ron Danner, number one. Number two, Judge, I haven't studied Ron Danner's material for quite some time, but I can tell you this. I do not recall in any way that Ron Danner ever told the police or made a statement indicating that Margaret Rudin called the police on the date in question. Now, he is representative of this court and to this jury that, in fact, Ron Danner did that. And if I am wrong, and those statements appear there, I stand corrected. But my statement and my objection is twofold. Number one, it is a hearsay statement, and number two, I do not believe that he had a good faith basis to even make it. More importantly, he's been a licensed attorney for many, many years, and he has to know that Ron Danner's statement is a hearsay statement, and he didn't bring it before this court, and he's now rang the bell in front of this jury.
Oh, well, again, I keep saying, and I let you get away with a lot, Mr. Amador, but the purpose of a opening statement is just to indicate what the evidence is going to tend to show, and not go into your personal beliefs and your passion and your soccer dad and you're yelling at the staff and you when you were a green lawyer and you know all the cops and you used to be a DA and you communicate differently. I never heard that in an opening statement in my life. However, the fact remains, well, let's just stick to this issue. How will you said that you're going to prove to the jury that she called up and it was told by the police 24 hours, and you mentioned Ron Danner. Is there a report to that effect?
48 hours. A couple of things.
48 hours.
Okay. First thing, yes, I read it in a report. I believe, as I was going through this missing persons, I don't have all of my files here, but I will produce a report that describes that Margaret told him that she had to wait 48 hours to report him missing. Now, why would that be admissible? Mm-hmm. It's not admissible in and of itself for the truth of the matter, because Margaret could testify to that. Mm-hmm. What's important is that contained within Detective Vaccaro's affidavit in support of the search warrants, contained within the affidavit for the wiretaps, part of his investigation, he always talked about how Margaret waited an unusually long time to report her husband missing. And we all read about that. And 48 hours with that rule, it's not a long time, and it didn't violate that rule. Now, the fact, and when we locate that actual report, it's in a statement at the very end, we'll be able to show that Detective Vaccaro would have known that she had actually reported it, at least in terms of having seen another witness's statement that perhaps wasn't part of his homicide file, but was from missing persons, where that was indicated from the very beginning. If we
Well, I
take-
don't know if we could solve it. Mr. Diamond made an objection, is strenuous. You rang the bell, but you're going to move on to something else. You're not going to repeat it. Is that right?
My whole case isn't based upon that one
All right.
thing.
So you'll move on. So we don't. But if you do get that report, show it to Mr. Diamond, and I'll take a look.
I could try to find it now, but you know what?
No, we don't have time now. We only got a couple more minutes. I want you to finish up with your opening, and I want to have a few witnesses. That's what I want to do. All right? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nancy Byrne. Judge Bonaventure has called a short break in the trial. We will continue to monitor activity in the courtroom and will resume coverage of the Margaret Rudin trial just as soon as this break has ended.
During the course of the trial, there may be objections and things like that. Don't worry about it. We just have to do some other things. I mentioned to you that this is somewhat of a complex case.
I don't know what that means. Don't worry about objections. We'll have to do other things. I have no idea what that means.
Well, let me...
I mean, if there's an objection, I'm either going to overrule it or sustain it, and that's the law. I mean, what do you mean we're going to have to do some other things? Like what?
I didn't speak very well.
I didn't understand what you meant, but all right, go ahead. Proceed.
I'll just go on. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the things that we have available through the investigation are lengthy. The thousands and thousands of pages are complicated. Copious facts that are presented to you. Just as an example, are a line of folders from one grand jury, a second grand jury, discovery, a civil trial, transcript. This isn't a third of everything. It's just an example of what we have to do to prepare. People, though, that will testify, we can find out about what they said and when from these reports. Remember, we were in this timeline that you see on Tuesday, December 20th, 1994, some things did happen. On that Tuesday, Ronald Rudin's employees, Ronald Danner, Sharon Melton, went to the police station in the morning around 11 o'clock or so and reported Ronald Rudin missing. That's a fact, that they reported him missing. Other things, other opinions, you'll have to judge those separately. It is also a fact that Margaret Rudin reported her husband missing 13:58, 1:58 in the afternoon, timestamp 34 hours after he disappeared. Although it's reported an unusually long time and all those other things in various reports, I don't know why. On December 21st of 1994, now, things start happening. There's a break-in at Ronald Rudin's store. We know this because of the alarm companies responding. There's $15,000 taken from Ronald Rudin's drawer in cash by Sharon Melton, Ronald Danner, and Jill Jarian was there. This was reported to the police by Margaret as well. December 22nd, Thursday. A lot happens this day. Some very important things for you to look at. It's an action day. 8:30 a.m. There's a call from missing persons to Sharon Melton at her home. For the first time, although she'd given a report on Tuesday and a statement, now she says she heard gunshots. They came from the Rudin, inside the Rudin residence. She heard these gunshots at 9 o'clock in the morning on Monday, earlier in the week. 6 to 7 of them in rapid succession. She says that she was in the parking lot or the driveway to the residence when she heard these shots. And she looked for Ronald Rudin's car, found that it wasn't there, and then she said, quote, "And I thought nothing else of it." That's what she reported by this telephone call, missing persons. What else? She also said, none of that money is Margaret's. It's all trust money. Everything belongs to the trust. Something we hear a lot thereafter as well. Sharon Melton at one time was one of the trustees and thought she was a trustee that day still, but she had already been removed. Ron Rudin got rid of trustees, added new ones, got rid of beneficiaries, added new ones, depending on how your relationship was at the time. There would be evidence that he changed it numerous times. In 1988, when they were maybe going to get a divorce, he didn't like her as much, I suppose, so he removed her as a beneficiary. And she came back and things were better, and he added her as a beneficiary and a percentage. See, it is also a fact that he continued to increase Margaret's share of his trust, not decrease her. It is also a fact that he reduced Sharon Cooper's share down to 10%. Not Sharon Milton, Sharon Cooper. One of the two trustees who eventually took control of everything Ron Rudin owned. She was asked to go back. Oh, I'm sorry. There was one more thing about that phone call. Pat Brown was a trust lawyer. Sharon Melton says, and so you know that $15,000 isn't hers, basically. Here's her lawyer in my home at 8:30 in the morning. What is she doing there? Not once had she ever, as far as our investigation reveals, been to the Ron Rudin home or to his business to do legal business. But he's at a bookkeeper's house. She's at a bookkeeper's house at 8:30 in the morning. Why? You see, there's some other action that takes place. She gets on the telephone. Basically, now that foul play appears to have been brought out, first time, it's reported. She says, "I'm taking temporary power of attorney over the Rudin accounts." It's important that this is the first action by any person that we know of towards taking control of $11 million. What else did you? What did Margaret do? She hired a private investigator to look for him and to call everybody he knew. He used to go hunting, all sorts of different things. She tried to find him. That after, also Pat Brown, she also says a couple of other things that you'll hear from the same people. Melton, others that were within a close group that also despised Margaret, seemed to say things about how bad their marriage was. Some other sorts of things that you'll decide on the importance. 2:30 that afternoon, Sharon Melton goes to the police station. They'd asked her to do a written statement. She does so. Now, she may not have realized, I don't know who saw it, but if you go through all this, you'll find that what I just described isn't a normal statement. It's a computer read of what a missing persons detective types and puts into his missing persons log. It's different than all the other reports. You read these things enough times, you'll kind of look for some things. And they may not have known that record actually existed. But it's different. What you'll see at 2:30, she says, Sharon Melton, we got to the Rudin place of business on Charleston at 9 o'clock in the morning. Now, I'm paraphrasing in case I get one word wrong here or there, but this is what she said. She was with Danner, and Lily Grinsfield, another employee. Something's wrong. Ronald Rudin, he never misses work. He's never late. He's always there to open it up for us right at 9 o'clock. Every single time, never failing. And we heard gunshots coming from the Rudin residence, which is on the other side of the wall from the strip mall. She said, we were in the parking lot of the business when we heard this, and we were so scared, so frightened for our lives, that they went around the corner of the Winchell's Donuts and sat there to think about it. What, to find a cop? Why? Why not report it Tuesday? Why the difference? When you look at something that's not true, it is extremely helpful because it can point you in the right direction when you are reviewing the evidence. It will help you to identify individuals, perhaps their motives, and how they may relate to other people. The fact that there is an action, there is a legal significance to foul play. Perhaps not something Sharon Melton was aware of. But trust lawyers, there's significance to that statement because as a result of those two written statements, things really started to happen. I mean, really important things. But to who is it important? That was Thursday, 2:30 in the afternoon. More foul play. That evening, 11 o'clock at night, the Ronald Rudin vehicle is found behind the Crazy Horse 2. And Missing Persons goes out there, and there's testimony from Detective Picaro, another hearing, that he also was there. It's not yet assigned, he's homicide. Neighbors curious. Friday morning, the next morning, they're at Chief Deputy District Attorney Ulrich Smith's office with an affidavit by Detective Spinoza, which is, I believe, sexual assault, which is over Missing Persons, although went to intelligence, in support of a pen register device, using as its basis that Margaret Rudin waited a suspiciously or unusually long time to report her husband missing. Well, I believe that Ulrich Smith will testify in accordance with his memory. He says he doesn't remember anyone else but Picaro and Ramos coming to see him on this case. And he did the work on that pen register device. That's not as important as these other things. I just mentioned that. Things started happening with the police department and with the DA's office as a result of what had been going on so far. What happens after that? It was Friday the 23rd when this happened. It's Christmas weekend. The state's timeline. They tell you to look at Margaret Rudin's activity, that she might do the best she can to enjoy Christmas. Would you begrudge her that? As if there was something wrong with it? What else do we know? Missing Persons received a consent to search her home. And they went through the whole house. Words like cursory and body search were used. That's not what they did. They looked everywhere. And what else? To see if he had a heart attack. He might be laying someplace in the house. They were standing right on the very place where this Mr. Lovato says he saw something underneath the carpet that could have possibly been blood. He was standing there. They were standing there, checking under the bed, looking everywhere. There'll be evidence and testimony that there was nothing there. She certainly had other reasons she had some really good reasons for remodeling that room. His third wife died in that room. Her husband that she loved. One of the last places. The place that was theirs. felt eerie for her to go in there. Did she need to wait until January, late January, to hear from the detectives that her husband wasn't coming back? Look at the evidence. Remember what kind of man he was. He could take care of himself. What she'd heard so far and the car being found there, she began to know what the truth was. And why didn't she ask the police department how the investigation was coming? She had her own beliefs as to who was involved with her husband's murder. And unfortunately if she's correct, then the police were helping, unwittingly perhaps, Ron Rudin's killers take everything that Margaret owned from her. You see, 1 week after his reported disappearance on December 27th, 1995, Sharon Cooper, who had been a real estate agent working in his office in 1980, and who went to work for various escrow companies and as an escrow agent, had a lot to do with Ron Rudin's other business. She files what's called a notice of incumbency, the first one, on December 27th of 95. It is a document that is necessary in order to take over someone's accounts and businesses if they're within a trust. She does that, and she does one more thing, and it's important as it relates to other things. Of all the things that he owned that were either mortgaged to the hilt or that even weren't that may not have even been in his name, the one thing he'd been working on for 20 years, the big score for him, was that 11 o'clock appointment I talked about on Monday that he didn't make it for, an $8 million offer to be discussed for the sale of the Lee Canyon development. Certain dates and things are important when you look at the big picture. That $8 million offer on December 19th could very well have been what caused his death at that particular time. You'll hear a lot more about the evidence about that and all of the other real estate holdings as it relates to this case. Sharon Cooper transferred the entire Lee Canyon development from that $8 million offer without telling anybody, well, at least so far as the wife of Margaret Rudin, the wife of Ronald Rudin, she does this secretly. She transfers the entire development into her name as sole trustee of the Ronald Rudin Property Trust. January and December was when those missing persons detectives were there. I wanted to mention one thing about that. Mr. Lovato would testify, they would have us believe that what he saw smelled terrible, was rancid. The detectives will testify most likely that they were standing in the same position and there was no such smell and no stains. They're standing on the carpet that they say Margaret had removed. January, Nelson's Landing. Remember those photographs? What do you see? If what you see has legal significance and time, then there's more here than meets the eye. His name, Ron, encrusted in diamonds. The result of that is that Metro doesn't have to go through hundreds of other files to determine which file this might apply to. They're given a direction. They're given that direction by whoever left that there. It points to identification. Identification being the result of the skull. Dental records to identify. Who would go through so much trouble to do this? And why would the body be burnt, unlike his head? You'll hear testimony from the coroner's office describing his autopsy and the number of injuries to the skull. And I expect that his testimony in court will be different than his autopsy report. It will be different in that there seems to be more holes than there should have been. There were more entry wounds. His report perhaps was insufficient. Perhaps he'll be able to explain. But it's also important to look at where these are and how the experts will eventually tell you that each of these has some significance. If the state's theory is that he was lying in bed asleep and on the right side looking in one direction, whatever that was, I believe that you'll hear other testimony that it is physically impossible to have the injuries, the bullet entry wounds to a skull. You'll notice in some of the other photographs that they have to move the skull around in order to show you where they are, where these injuries are. If he was laying in bed asleep, it's not possible for these wounds to exist on the skull as they are, unless he was cooperative and turned over in the middle of it. The testimony will also reveal that it is impossible by good science, techniques that you can use and rely upon, for any, if there was any spray, to result in the types of physical evidence that the state would like you to believe. What happens? What happens next? There's a search warrant, which is subsequent to Mr. Lovato's statement on January 25th. See, Mr. Lovato is the first real witness who might be able to point the finger at Margaret. Now, there is evidence to the effect that an advertisement, perhaps in the newspaper, was put out by the trustees of a $25,000 reward available to witnesses who could assist them in their endeavors. It says more about it, but it's from the trustees who are taking over the estate that put this advertisement out. And I think, and I could be wrong, I'm sure, that advertisement was January 26th of 95, the day after his statement. But a lot of people knew about that beforehand, and although it advertised on that day, the order probably went in sometime before. Whether or not that's a factor in Mr. Lovato's testimony, we'll have to see. We'll have to hear his testimony. I'll ask him. If he was offered a $25,000 reward, well, and he denies it, then that's it, I guess. Because certainly, if it was offered, we certainly couldn't expect to get it now. There were lawyers hired by the trustees. As you recall in opening statements, the prosecution mentioned Margaret hired lawyers, almost like there was something wrong with that. Lawyers were hired by the trustees. These are strangers. She's his wife. And yet these people came in and hired Mark Solomon, general partner of Lionel Story and Collins, the most powerful and politically connected law firm in the state of Nevada. Good lawyers, strong lawyers, an army of people to help them, to help the trustees, along with Earl Monzi, another good lawyer in Las Vegas, well known and respected, to do what they do in probate court. And please, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, as I discuss certain things, please don't in any way take any of my remarks as disparaging to any individuals. Some things just are. and I cast no dispersions on anyone. Lawyers are hired to do a job, and in civil court, they fight over things. They fight well. It's not criminal court, it's different. But what did they do, and how did it affect Margaret? As I mentioned, Margaret did certain things. She hired a private investigator. She set up a little thing in her house with some candles and his picture. She was worried about her husband. She had grandchildren. You'll find during the course of the trial that the person, the cold, heartless, cunning person we're talking about, the evidence will show that the single most important thing to Margaret's life were her grandchildren. So important so that when she was away after the indictment, she risked her life and her safety in 1999, October, to send her grandchildren through a friend in Utah, 7 boxes, which included Christmas presents, cards, letters, telling them that no matter what they heard, no matter where she was, that she loved them. That's the kind of person that she was. And Christmas of 1994, she attempted to make it as normal as possible for them. And she hired Lovato to come over and help get her place put together so that she could at least have a semblance of a holiday under the circumstances. She had hired Mr. Lovato from Labor Express on December 20th of 94. The next day, actually, is when Missing Persons came over to the house and did a search. January 13th of 1995, Lovato helped with what they call the remodel. January 25th, Vaccaro gives his statement to the police after the Rudin's remains were discovered the 21st or 22nd of January of 95. January 27th, 1995, search warrants, which is, as a result, we have what they may refer to as overwhelming physical evidence, which, when you look at it and you listen to the experts, is not as it seems. In fact, it isn't even what they say. I'm going to object. That's argumentative.
Thank
you, Judge. What were other people doing from then? Remember that December 27th? What were they doing between then and February 1st when Margaret left to go bury the remains of her husband in Illinois? See, she was trying to take care of her life that seemed to have suddenly disappeared. See, December 18th, when we started this, it was a great day. Her new antique shop. And now, by February 1st of 1995, the trustees had replaced the Pat Brown with Lionel Story Collins and Earl Monzi. And they filed another notice of incumbency because apparently the first one wasn't legal. It required 2 trustees, and the first one said the Harold Boscuti, remember that name? The Harold Boscuti could not act, was not willing to act or was not able to. So by February 1st, they filed another one with both their names. And what were they able to accomplish? They evicted Margaret Rudin from her home on Alpine. They kicked her out of her own house. They canceled her credit cards. They seized the Rudin's bank accounts. They left her homeless, where she had to live with friends, without any funds. And she learned about this while she was trying to make arrangements for her husband's funeral in Illinois. And when she came back, they stole her car. They call it repossessing, but it was taken from a hotel parking lot. So, should we begrudge her trying to hire a lawyer to help her with this? You better hire a lawyer when you see this stuff kind of going on. you know, you better do the best you can, because it was getting worse. On January 10th, the file had been turned over from missing persons to homicide, Detectives Ricard and Ramos. The strip mall on Charleston had been transferred into the names of the trustees on behalf of the trust. The house on Alpine as well. His other properties, he had Colt Creek, where he had parcels of property that he sold and would receive a down payment, and monthly payments were made towards these parcels. People could build on them up in the mountains. All of that went to the trust. Prior to February 1st, however, it was Sharon Cooper's name as sole trustee of the Ron Rudin Property Trust. And the grand jury is set by the prosecution office. Not to indict. No, they need help to investigate. Put witnesses on. Create witnesses.
Judge, objection. Well, I don't know. That's argumentative, creating witnesses and stuff. But come on, just what the evidence would tend to show. Please, stick to that and let's move on.
What did Margaret do in probate court? What was that about? Why is it important here? Well, she petitioned probate court for a few things. The state said that she asked for money. I mean, do you see how that sounds? Well, you know, if a woman is getting divorced and her husband controls everything through business, see, the rules allow a woman to get temporary fees and allowances, to hire an attorney, to live on, so that the playing ground is fair. It seemed natural for her and her attorney to do the same thing in probate court. So she did. She petitioned the court for money to live on, food, rent to live in a place, transportation, and for an attorney, maybe for an investigator, since, you see, the trustees hired the best and were using everything at their disposal. Whose money was it? And she received a response in probate court. No. No. No, you can't have any of that. You're on your own. So she... Why is that? Well, she had the antique store. She purchased basically all the antiques and her inventory as a result of... She had a car accident. She was hit by a drunk driver years earlier, and she was hurt bad. And she got better. She had a head injury. And a lot of that money went to creating her own business, so she could have something of her own. She had to sell all of that to try to get a lawyer. And what happened next during 1995 was very difficult and helps to explain a question. It seems like it's the first question that everybody asks, and probably one that you want answered as well. And in my opening statement, I think I should discuss it with you. Why did she leave rather than stay and fight an indictment? Some people would see, if there is no explanation, then you might take that as evidence against her. But various reasons for someone leaving might be offered and will be offered by the defense. She developed over 1995 a distrust for our judicial system. I'm not making a dispersion on it. I'm just saying, as it relates to Margaret, she felt that she had good reasons not to trust lawyers, judges, procedure. You see, during 1995, she went through several different lawyers, good lawyers, but it's expensive to do this, and she didn't seem to be able to come up with as much as someone might like. At one point, she actually had to act as her own lawyer, going to the law library to research the law as it applies to all these things, by herself to fight this kind of fight. How could she trust a system where there's $11 million? She's been married to Ron Rudin for all those years. And you'd also find out in divorce court that men, and I'm not saying just men, but women could do this, but you know, when we control things, we can call them something, we can move accounts, we can put things in other people's names. And you have to understand that the law on community property doesn't care what you call something. You can say it's in a trust and it's not hers.
Is there an objection argumentative?
It's what someone will testify. We have extra
All right,
witnesses.
overruled.
See, the real crux of that is much of that which was in the estate was not even subject to the trust. They'll try to say it was all the trusts. Simply because it says so doesn't mean it's so. The law is that community property, things that are earned during the marriage, is half hers. And you see, so for her to get nothing to live on, not even the money to hire an attorney from the court system here, to her, what choice did she have? That, and at least from her point of view, the people that she believed were involved in hiring and killing her husband were provided the entire homicide investigation file through lawyers to assist them in preparation for a probate trial, which was to try Margaret Rudin for murder in probate court. The purpose for which is if you can prove, and the burden of proof we have here, if you can prove enough, and you can prove that she killed her husband, then you take everything away from her, because the law says you cannot receive funds, assets, or property as a result of someone's will or trust if you had something to do with its death. You see, what does not apply would have been community property, which was already hers. She didn't understand why that didn't apply, because she knew this to be true. She'd been married and divorced 4 times. She'd hired a lawyer on each occasion, each one taking the time to explain the law to her on community property. And perhaps one of the best witnesses the defense will have during the trial is Stuart Bell, Clark County District Attorney, right now, and her divorce lawyer. In 1987, when she divorced Mr. Crafty. 5 weeks before the end of that divorce, she had met Ronald Rudin. He was also getting divorced at the time. 6 weeks after the divorce ended, she married Ronald Rudin. So when this investigation was going on, and her lawyer was spearheading it, she began to distrust.
Judge, objection is suggested.
No, I'm not. I'm saying that it was in her mind.
Rephrase it.
See, I suggest nothing, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. I suggest only what was perhaps in her mind, as she saw things from her point of view. Her lawyer prosecuting her, someone who she had trusted in with confidential, private information, that you have to do. You have to be able to do that when you're getting divorced, because Mr. Crafty was far more wealthy than Mr. Rudin. So, Stuart Bell can confirm that she doesn't kill rich husbands, she divorces them. And she hires a good lawyer to fight for. She knows how to do that. What else did the lawyers for the trustees do in 1995? I'm going to run through some things now as quickly as I possibly can without getting too complicated, because it can get real complicated with paperwork, so I'll try to keep it simple. In 1995, what are called quiet title actions were filed by Solomon and Monzi. Why'd they do that? Why? Because over a period of years, Ronald Rudin purchased large tracts of property and he didn't use his own name. How did he do that? did he do that? Well, see, in 1980, he purchased the Lee Canyon development, the one with the $8 million offer, by the way, which was sold by the trustees for $6 million in 1996. An offer being made 3 days after a settlement with Margaret. Well, he bought that under the name of Riley. He bought other property under the names of Riley, Wolf, Feinstein, a host of others. How do you do that when you have to have someone to assist you? Is that just a simple straw man? Sort of something normally done in real estate? They had to file quiet title actions because a huge amount of property that Ronald Rudin owned, didn't even mention his name, although somewhere in the records transactions he was there. To make it simple, there's Cold Creek. There's Lee Canyon. There's his rehab business. Remember Mr. Buscudi, who owned Mustang Realty? Mr. Buscudi assisted him with the rehab business. And for probably 25 years or so, Ronald Rudin would purchase homes. Ronald Danner would help fix them up and would add up all the costs. And if you know anything about taxes, what you do is you don't have, when you sell the property, you add the costs of repairs to the overall cost, and then you only have to pay taxes on the difference. And for 25 years, let's see here, for 25 years he didn't make a profit on a single house. You see, the costs always seem to equal profit. How he was able to get away with that for so long perhaps is truly brilliant. Or, in one sense, he had a lot of help. His bookkeeper, Sharon Melton, was very helpful over the years in providing a liaison, if you will, between Ronald Rudin, Pat Romine, his accountant. Cold Creek, big development that he purchased, a little bit down and a lot over time. Cold Creek was parceled up. Several of the first sales were not to real people. Why? When you have undeveloped land and you need to establish a price, until you start selling things, it's speculative. It's worth whatever anybody will pay you for it. Unless you've got this brilliant idea to sell property to people who don't exist. Now, to do that, since they have to sign documents, you need a notary public and somebody who works where? An escrow company, to handle every single one of your transactions over the years. Someone you can trust, named Sharon Cooper, who's a notary. You won't find speculation from the defense in this regard. What we'll show you will be deeds signed by Ronald Rudin, but not his name. Riley, Schooler, Feinstein, Wolf. Some people actually, like Wolf and Riley, those names came from distant relatives that had nothing to do with this. He just used those names. But Feinstein, Schooler, they didn't exist. But Sharon Cooper notarized their signature on every one of these transactions. Notarized deeds on behalf of Ronald Rudin to assist him in perpetrating a fraud, a real estate fraud, over a period of years. First with Cold Creek, so that he could develop a sales price. And then as a result of that, he didn't have to do it anymore. He had real sales. He sold to people pieces of property and then would receive payments. He took back a deed of trust and would have a mortgage. Why does that relate to Lee Canyon? I didn't understand any of this. As far as that's concerned, it's really difficult. So somebody explained it to me, I suppose. But if you follow what happened to the money, it seems more obvious and a lot simpler than it looked at first glance. All of those mortgages had a value, which paid over time would be something like $270,000 or something $1,000. But if you buy low and sell high, you pay taxes on the difference, don't you? So an assignment to Nathan Feinstein of all of those mortgages for a price that just coincidentally was the down payment on Lee Canyon would solve a financial difficulty if you don't like to pay taxes. The assignment to Nathan Feinstein, all the collection accounts for those properties where the money was going into them were also turned over to the names Feinstein at lawyer's title various times when Sharon Cooper would be working there, but she was always there to protect him, to notarize phony signatures. At least when I was over here, they called that forgery.
Judge, objection. It becomes argumentative.
Sustained.
So, things get to be a little bit more clear. He buys Lee Canyon. Now, Lee Canyon is made up of 3 parcels, but the biggest one was purchased from Joella Levy in 1980. There were some other partners in the earlier projects, small, 15 acres, 20 acres, but overall they ended up making Lee Canyon. I showed you how he related, how he was able to get the money from one place to another. I only mention all of that because it helps to establish a relationship with Sharon Cooper and with Harold Boscuti, who also was involved in notarizing, not as much as Sharon was, because see, nobody can help you like the escrow agent who controls all the paperwork. And do I vilify him? No. You know, I don't make judgments on people paying taxes and things like that. That's up to them. But the way he did it was really remarkable. And never got caught, except the end result, perhaps, was how he ended up paying the price. Because Lee Canyon, from 1980 until 1994, changed hands time after time after time, from Riley to Schooler and Riley, to Wolf, to Blazinski. That was one of the last names. You'll hear others, but basically these are non-existent people. These are phony, fraudulent transactions, which...
Objection. Argumentative.
I expect that's exactly what the...
Overruled.
what the evidence will show. How it's relevant, though, is not to show... What it's relevant to is to establish the relationship of certain people and why they knew what they knew and why they were able to do what they did at the right time. So eventually, the one thing about Lee Canyon that's real special is that, unlike Cold Creek, it's simple for me to understand. It goes from one step to the next, from 1980 through 1994, and there's no real transaction, so there's no difficulty. In fact, one of the interesting ways of proving it, because how do you prove somebody doesn't exist? Quiet title actions. See, Mr. Solomon and Mr. Monzi need to get that property. And it didn't go into his estate. You see, a probate is a public record. Everything that happens in a probate case is a public record, and you can look it up. What you do with a trust is private. We don't know. All we know is that every single property that was out there under a different name was brought back in, not to the estate, but to the trust, through quiet title actions and affidavits by Mr. Solomon, by Sharon Cooper, by Mr. Boscuti, by other witnesses that they have on their witness list who were involved in this, who, for whatever reason that they may testify to, were involved in making sure this property was brought back in and under control. You see, in a quiet title action, you have to give notice to the potential people who may have a claim. I wonder if they left anyone out. Margaret Rudin never received a single notice that any of this was going on. Along with the other things in 1995, they never let her know so that she could at least even file a claim. When did Margaret start to be concerned about these financial dealings? Is this something that just came up at the last minute? Perhaps, other than just infidelity, you might now understand why someone might want to listen to conversations when your husband is so secretive. You don't even know who his friends are. You don't know where he goes. You don't know who he meets. You seem to have talked like he had a lot of money when you first were together, but then you live in a house that, well, you certainly don't want to live in it, but you stay with your husband and you try to make things work. Something happened in 1994 that's of a significance, and it may not have meant, or it may not have realized what she was doing at the time. She refused to sign a joint income tax form with Ronald Rudin. She was concerned that, having found out about some of these problems, they don't make a distinction as to husband and wife when you both sign the form. But when she refused to sign it, she may not have realized who else might have been worried about that. And some dominoes started to move. And in 1994, just as Ronald Rudin was about to make the big score, he tried like 3 times to make something out of Lee Canyon. He tried to go public. He tried to have this a park. He did all sorts of things, spent a ton of money trying to make it work. But in the end, the only thing that would work is the scheming had to increase its value. Each time you sell it, by the way, there's a price. And it keeps going up and up and up. If you're attempting to sell a piece of property for which there may be not kind of value that you want for it, and people are going to look at the appraiser, you don't have to buy an appraiser. You don't have to bribe an appraiser for a phony report. He can look at the property. What do they check? Comparables, comps. They look to see what it sold for and how much and when. So an appraiser can actually look at Lee Canyon development and independently and objectively, but for what he didn't know, give it a value. The reason for this? They say Margaret had a reason to kill her husband, that her motive was for money. $600,000 settlement at the end of that trial. She didn't even have a lawyer as of December 29th, 1995, with trial scheduled in January. She was able to get a couple of guys here in Las Vegas, good lawyers, Ted Manos and Chuck Kelly. They're not probate lawyers. They share an office here in Las Vegas. They did it on a contingency, 50%. I don't blame them for the high percentage. They had to get prepared in 3 weeks to go to trial, hoping to get a continuance, but no. What did they have to prepare? 5 days before trial, they were given all of the trial exhibits, everything, all the discovery, everything that they had to prepare for came from the other side 5 days before trial. What happened? They got their clocks cleaned. I mean, what do you think might happen? They're good lawyers, but when Margaret was given the proposition by her lawyers, you can get nothing or $600,000. We're sorry. We just didn't have enough time. We're sorry. You know, the other side, they're so strong, they've got everything. They're an army. We didn't have the kind of access to the police like they did in the DA's office. We did the best we could. Take this or we can't help you. She took it, but that $600,000 seemed to dwindle because the first $420,000 went to lawyers for costs, expenses. She had borrowed so much during 1995 to try to, at a time when she believed that she had a lot more. So a lot of the remaining 180 was gone. But she wouldn't stop talking. She wouldn't shut up. You see, Margaret didn't sit back quietly. She told everyone she knew. She wrote letters. She wrote big, long books, sort of things, outlines of things that happened to her and how outrageous it was. How could this happen? But nobody cared. Nobody listened. But she wouldn't be quiet. And in 1997, they took her case to the grand jury, and she was indicted for the murder of her husband and that illegal wiretap thing. You see, the timeline that we talked about is not so simple, is it? There are specific times where there's an incredible amount of activity involved, and it's helpful because that type of timeline from December 18th through February 1st, what it does is it identifies action by people. Why was Margaret afraid of the trustees? Also when she left. Why did she already believe that her husband was gone before she was told by the police? Her husband was a tough guy. Nobody messed with his money. Nobody. And she knew. And the trustees knew. They wouldn't do these things. It would be an inference that we would ask you to draw at a later time.
Positive questions, asking the jury to draw inferences. I just think this whole thing has been argumentative.
I do too. It's almost going on 3 hours now.
Judge, I'm done.
You said about an hour and a half. So go ahead, finish up.
Thank you. You'll understand by the end of the trial why she was scared. You'll understand why she couldn't, in her mind, trust anything going on here in Las Vegas. Why didn't she report things to the police? Why did she not ask about how their investigation of Ronald Rudin's disappearance was going? This was not some... She had reasons to believe. She had reasons to be scared. That wasn't the place to ask for help.
All right, make the same objection.
Objection sustained. The jury will disregard that.
The gun was found in the summer of 1996. It was found at Lake Mead, wrapped in about 20 plastic bags and wrapped in a t-shirt. You'll hear evidence about that and it being found by a fisherman. You'll ask a question, or at least the evidence will provide a question. Does someone attempt to preserve evidence by wrapping it like that? Or if someone is attempting to get rid of it, do you throw it in 15 feet of water and preserve it in such a way that maybe it can be preserved and tested later? It's a real interesting part of this trial. This case will provide you with, and I apologize for the length of time that I took. I didn't want to take this much time, but let me finish up. Let me summarize. This case will provide you with a glimpse of how we live. It'll provide you with history, because it goes back for Ronald Rudin's life to how things were done in the 70s all the way through now. It gives you an idea of what forensic evidence is like in a trial like this, because I'm not sure from my list, but I don't think we missed anything. Everything from gathering of evidence, identifying evidence, and then testing it. And the states retested the evidence like 3 or 4 times with some of these things. Experts will testify about ballistics. Was that the gun that killed Ronald Rudin? Yes, it was. ballistics proved that. Our expert said the bullets came from that gun. Who had that gun? It was taken in 1988, or maybe it wasn't taken. All we know is, from what the state has, is that letter that says that it may have gone into his wife's things. Now, they were also going to get divorced back then. Who knows what he was going to do with that if he kept that gun? Has anyone else been seen with that gun? Was she ever seen with it? When they got back together, would he have asked about it? Or just kind of let it go? Why was that gun not listed as stolen by the Las Vegas, or lost by the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department?
Judge, I'm going to object. This is time to talk about what the other's going to say, not to suggest...
I know, it's all, it's something you should have done. You should have saved an hour and a half, 2 hours for a closing statement. This is a combination, opening, closing, and whatever. I'll let you get away with it, Mr. Amador, but I am losing patience now. Summarize it.
Thank you.
Objection sustained. You're not to say that.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, as you receive all the evidence, take special time and attention to each one. Wait till all the evidence is in. Take each for what it deserves, and look at what it really is over a period of time. Because when you go through the case, when you look at the state's theory and what it must prove, you'll find that Margaret Rudin was a suspect at a time when there didn't seem to be a lot of, if any, evidence against her. But they'll try to prove that his body was found that the remains of his body at Nelson's Landing, that it was burned there. I suggest to you that is not true. Their evidence will be presented in an attempt to prove that he was killed in his room, his bedroom. I intend to show that he was not. I don't know where. But if it's not where they say it is, it doesn't fit their circumstantial case. I'm not going to tell you that I'm going to prove that the trustees killed her husband. It's not my job anymore. But what I can do is I can prove they had better motive, better means, better opportunity, better lawyers, and that they did things at a time when only knowing that Ronald Rudin was dead when they shouldn't have known it is the only way to explain their actions. At the end of this case, when you've heard everything, we'll talk to you again. And I will ask you to find Margaret Rudin not guilty of all of the charges for which she is currently accused. And I thank you for your time and your patience.
Thank you. Don't converse among yourselves, anyone else on any subject connected with the trial. Read, watch, or listen to any report or commentary in the trial, any person connected with the trial. Any medium of information, including without limitation, newspapers, television, radio, and don't form or express any opinion on the trial till the cause is finally submitted to you. We'll take a 10-minute recess.